Hello, everyone. Pam here. I am here to share with you some ways of cataloging your book this week. So, first, I'm going to share my screen with you. Here goes. We are in our cataloging course Moodle and scrolling down to week 2 library systems. And you'll notice we have our Destiny test site. I'm going to click on that. And it opens up this screen. From here, we're going to select our school. We are at Hingham Middle School. That is our Destiny test site. So click on Hingham Middle School, and up in the top right, we click on Login. And our username is C. Horning, and our password is Lincoln. We click the Login button from there, and here we are in our test site. So one thing I want you to notice is that up at the top, there is a link, a toggle between resource view and library view. Make sure you're on library view or you can easily get confused. We're going straight to catalog because we're adding a book to our library catalog. And we are going to start right here. We have a book. Maybe some of you have remember this from my last video. It's called Beowulf by Seamus Heaney. So we're going to try to add that to this catalog. And the first thing that I would do anytime I was adding a new book to my catalog is I would make sure we didn't already have a copy of it. So here we are. This is the library catalog page. So this is what patrons see without all of the detail down the side. So I would type in Beowulf. Pops up on my screen, and then you can click title or you can just hit enter and it will search the keyword or the title. So there is a copy of Beowulf in our library. So this is called Beowulf, A New Telling by Robert Nye. But that doesn't look like our version of Beowulf by Seamus Heaney. Different cover, different author, definitely different year. So that is not the copy that we want. And we want to make sure that these are separate. Some researchers may be looking for the Old English version and the most recent translation of it. So they don't want this, they want to know that there's two different versions. I can also notice this, that this person cataloged this old version of Beowulf as fiction and then put it under the author's last name or the translator's last name, Nye. So that's an interesting choice that this cataloger made. So what we're going to do is we're going to add the title to our library collection. So we click on the button, Add a Title. And from here, the default is books, but we could be adding other items. And the default is ISBN, but we could be searching it differently. But I am going to search for this using the barcode. Here it is. So you type in the barcode, you can copy and paste it. If you had a barcode reader, you could scan the ISBN number from the publisher down on the corner of the book and click go. And what this does is it searches to see if any other libraries in your district have a copy of that record. And it also searches these other databases of records. So other schools nearby, including access to the Library of Congress cataloging and publication data, and other big universities that share their collection of resources. So excitingly, we recognize this cover as our version of Beowulf. And we can see it's from the year 2000. It says it's bilingual, which it is. It has 213 pages. Everything looks good. So we could go into details. If you're in a university library or a research library, you would want to go into details and make sure that everything was super precisely accurate. I'm imagining our middle school students in our fictional middle school probably aren't going to be using this version of Beowulf, but in the event that they were, they just need to know that it's translated by Seamus Heaney and that this is the newest version. So we will click on this and everything looks good. Here are our subject headings that were brought over by Library of Congress. We looked at those last time. We can see all of these descriptions. Looks good to me. So we're going to save the title. So now this just creates a title record in our database. It doesn't say that we actually have a barcoded copy that you can check out, just that the title is available without any, it says right here, there are no local copies of this title. So interesting to know, and there are no off-site copies of this title. So there's no copies in our other district libraries. So I also want to add a copy. So I could click on add copies, I could go to copies and notice there are no copies in the district. There's no copies at our library. So I'm going to click on add a copy. And here it gives us some options. It starts off with available. It could be loaned out, on order, out for repairs. Up to you. You can customize that status list when you have your real catalog in the future. The number of copies, because we only have one, we'll just type 1. We will, when you set up your catalog, you're going to input the barcodes that you have. And so you'll assign the next barcode and make sure everything matches up with the book. And you'll have to adhere one of your library's barcodes to this book. Here's the call number. So they have given us the Dewey Decimal number for Beowulf. So we can leave it as is. It's weird having that this hash mark in here. At the very least, I would take that out. I would also add the author or the translator's 3 initials, or the entire last name. You might want to put Haney in there. But the other thing that I encourage you to do, to experiment with in this class, to think about in the future, is how would students look for this? How might a student who is browsing the shelves really want to find Beowulf? What if they didn't start at the catalog? What if they just walked into your library and looked for it? I imagine it could be that they wanted to know where the classics section was. So where are the classics in the library? Are they all together? Are they in fiction? Are they classified in a way that keeps them together? Or are they all over the library? It may be in English history. It is probably going to be in poetry. So this one puts it in a very specialized area of poetry that is like poetry, English, old translations. In our middle school, we probably don't have a big section of Old English translated poetry. So what I would do, I would have like 2 or 3 options. I would either do 811, that's standard poetry. And we'd probably have a bunch of books in poetry. And then I'd put in Haney, or I'd put in Beowulf, because that's how I think people are going to be looking for it, especially middle school students. So you could do that. So everything ends up in the 811s. Every poetry book we get could potentially just go in the 811s. And then they're alphabetical by the author, or in this one, because it's really a translator, we don't know who the original author of Beowulf is. We could do it by title. So it's up to you as the librarian and how you think your students would think about how to access this information. Another option would be, heck, why make them learn the 811s mean poetry? What if we just said poetry and then we had a section that was just poetry? And it was one of the ranges of our shelves. So a range is this whole section. And we know they go left to right and then down to the next one, left to right and down to the next one. That's sometimes confusing to students. They think it should go all the way across. If we imagine we had multiple ranges like in a library, and they think the alphabet should go straight across the top shelves first. So that's something that you might want to explain to students. That has nothing to do with our cataloging right now. But imagine you had one range and you just put a sign up at the top that said poetry. And on the side of all of your poetry books was a label that just said poetry. So imagine, it's kind of scary because it's different, but if you have a small enough library and a community that is excited about adapting and students who want instant access to things like poetry, you could do that instead of making them browse through the whole 800 section to 829.3. So think about that. And then you could do poetry Beowulf or poetry Haney, however you wanted to do it. So think about that. You can enter the price if you want to. That's not always necessary. I feel like we're rarely asked to do any kind of reporting on individual copies of books. We usually use a big a generalization of how much nonfiction hardcover books typically are for our age group. We have circulation type right now. It's just regular. Like in the old days, we had reference. And so reference books might just go out overnight, but most of us got rid of our reference collection and we allow all the books to go out for multiple days. I mean, who's checking out dictionaries anymore? Except a kid who doesn't have access to a dictionary, so let them check it out for weeks. Date acquired, this is sometimes important. You want to see how often you add books to your catalog. We can add notes. I think copy category is not an important thing, but notes are important in that you may want to add a note that says, you could add a note that says something like used for Mr. Smith's English class. So you could start customize things and then students could search Mr. Smith. It's probably a bad example, but they could search Mr. Smith and then find a list of all of his books. But there's other ways of doing that too. If you had important volume and issue numbers, you could add it here. You could do copy numbers. So if we have multiple copies, that may be important to you. But it used to be important when we didn't have barcodes. But now that we have barcodes, that's really the copy number of our book. Finally, there's things like sublocations. We can add those. That's an exciting thing. We can add vendors, so who we got the book from, sometimes important, and a funding source. So we could add it, attach it to a purchase order, or we could say it was a grant or a gift or donation. It could come from like a trustee line item that could be important. So once you've made all of your changes, that's all we can change here. We'll save the copy. And so now it says copies at our middle school. We have one and it's available. People will think it's on the shelf. And here's the call number. It's in Poetry Beowulf. We can go back to the title details. We can see this. You can edit this title. If you wanted to add a little something to this description, we could do that. We could come down here and change whatever we needed to. So you can edit the title by clicking here and make changes. But think about it that the title is this big bibliographic record, and then the copies are these little like planets going around it. So the title is the big sunshine, and the copies are the individual copies that go around it. So you might have a title of the Oxford English Dictionary, just one title, Oxford English Dictionary, but we know that there are 32 volumes. And so you have 32 copies of that added to it, and each one has a different volume number with the letters associated with that. I think that is all I wanted to say. I have some notes. I think another thing that's important that you could consider is probably not with Beowulf, but with some of your fiction titles. If you are adding genres to fiction titles, you may want to add them to multiple locations. So if you have 2 copies of a book, we could add one copy to poetry, and I could have a classic section, and I add 1 copy to classics. So no matter how our students were looking for it, they would find it. I think that's everything I wanted to tell you. I hope that this was helpful to you in some way, and I look forward to talking more about all of this. Have a great day. Goodbye.